My name is Sister Elena, and until very recently, I felt like a fraud. I wore the habit, I prayed the office, and I served the poor in our downtown parish, but inside I was dry. It is a terrible thing to admit, especially for a woman who has pledged her life to the church, but for the last few years, God felt distant, like a radio signal that had faded into static. I went through the motions, kneeling when I was supposed to kneel, singing when I was supposed to sing, but my heart felt like a hollow drum. I looked at the world, the anger on the news, the suffering on the streets, the endless noise of 2024 and the beginning of 2025, and I wondered if any of it made a difference. I wondered if I was just wasting my life talking to a ceiling that wasn't listening. It was a rainy Tuesday, March 14th, 2025. I remember the date clearly because we were preparing for the St. Patrick's Day charity drive, which is always our biggest event of the spring. I was driving our old convent van, the back loaded with heavy cardboard boxes of canned goods for the shelter on the east side of the city. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it, creating a gray, watery curtain between me and the rest of the world. The traffic was terrible, a river of red brake lights stretching as far as I could see. I was at a stoplight, gripping the steering wheel, feeling that familiar ache of exhaustion in my lower back. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard, watching the minutes tick away, calculating how late I was going to be, how disappointed the Mother Superior would look. I whispered a prayer, not out of love, but out of habit, a rote recitation of words that had lost their flavor in my mouth. Lord, give me strength. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't expect anything other than the light turning green and the rain continuing to fall. The light turned green. I pressed the gas. That was the last thing I did on my own. I never saw the truck. The police later told me the driver had lost control on the slick pavement and ran the red light at 50 miles per hour, hydroplaning right into the driver's side door of the van. I didn't hear a crash. I didn't feel the metal crumpling around me or the glass shattering into 1,000 diamonds. One moment, there was the gray, rainy street, the smell of wet wool from my habit, and the hum of the heater. The next moment, there was a sensation of being violently pulled from a tight wetsuit. There was a loud pop, like a light bulb shattering in a quiet room, and then silence. Absolute, heavy, profound silence. I was standing on the road, but it wasn't the road I knew. The rain had stopped. In fact, the van, the truck, the shattered glass, the traffic, it was all gone. I was standing on what looked like a floor of glass, suspended in a space that was neither dark nor light, but a soft, humming twilight. It was the color of the sky just before dawn, a deep, resonant indigo that seemed to breathe. I looked down at my hands. They were translucent, glowing with a faint inner energy, like milk glass held up to a candle. I touched my face, and I felt real, more real than I had ever felt in the body I had left behind. I wasn't afraid. That was the strangest part. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for years, the tight knot in my chest that woke me up at 3 a.m., was simply gone. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like waking up after a 10-year sleep. Then, the atmosphere changed. The air grew warm, not like a heater or a fire, but like the feeling of stepping into a home where you are deeply loved, a warmth that penetrated the very core of my being. A light began to form in front of me. It wasn't blinding, though it was brighter than the sun. It was solid, more real than the asphalt I had just been driving on. It was a living light, pulsing with a golden heartbeat. And out of that light, he stepped forward. I knew it was Jesus. It wasn't because of a picture I had seen in a church or a statue in the convent garden. It was because my soul, which I had thought was dead and dry, suddenly vibrated with recognition. It was like a compass needle snapping to true north after spinning wildly for years. It was the recognition of the Creator by the created. But my reaction wasn't joy, it was shame. I wanted to cover my face. I wanted to hide. Here I was, the nun who had doubted, the woman who had felt her prayers were useless, the hollow vessel, standing before the source of all life. I felt small, unworthy, and exposed. I could see my own soul, and it looked dusty to me. Neglected. I expected him to ask me why my heart had grown cold. I expected him to point out my lack of faith during those long, hard months of 2024. I prepared myself for judgment, for the disappointment I was sure he must feel. He didn't speak. He closed the distance between us in a heartbeat. He didn't look like a painting. He looked like a man. Yet his eyes held the weight of galaxies and the tenderness of a mother. He wore a simple robe that seemed woven from the light itself. He reached out and took my hands. His grip was firm, grounding, solid. "Elena," he said. His voice wasn't a sound that traveled through the air. It was a vibration that resonated in my chest, bypassing my ears and speaking directly to my mind. "Look at me." I forced myself to look up, trembling. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no disappointment. There was only a look of such profound familiarity, as if we had been in the middle of a conversation that had never really ended, as if he had been waiting for me to arrive for a long time. I was so tired," I stammered, the words tumbling out of my soul. "I thought you weren't there. I thought I was talking to nothing." "I know," he replied, and the compassion in his tone broke me. It wasn't a dismissive "I know," it was an "I experienced it with you knowing." But believing I am gone does not make me absent. You felt the silence and called it emptiness. But I was in the silence. Come, you must see what you were too blind to see. He turned, and the twilight around us dissolved. We weren't walking, but the scenery shifted around us, as if we were moving through a reel of film, yet fully immersed in it. We were suddenly hovering above a hospital hallway. I recognized it immediately. It was the oncology ward at St. Jude's, where I had visited a parishioner 3 months prior, back in December 2024. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax was overpowering, even in the vision. I saw myself, my earthly self, walking down the hall. I looked exhausted, my shoulders slumped, clutching my rosary like a weapon I didn't know how to use. I saw myself stop and briefly place a hand on the shoulder of a young nurse sitting at a desk, her head in her hands. In the memory, I had just said something brief, handed her a tissue, and kept walking, too wrapped up in my own fatigue to engage. "I remember this," I said to Jesus, feeling a fresh wave of regret. I was in such a rush. I just wanted to get home and sleep. I didn't do anything important. I barely spoke to her. Jesus pointed to the nurse. "Watch. Look not with your eyes, but with your heart." As the vision unfolded, the scene seemed to zoom in on the nurse. I saw her energy field, a swirling mass of dark gray and bruised purple. She was despairing. She had lost a patient an hour before, a child, and she was questioning her entire vocation. She was ready to quit. She was ready to walk out the door and never come back. But then I saw my hand touch her shoulder. From my hand, a small golden spark jumped into her. It wasn't huge, it was tiny, like a firefly. But when it hit her gray energy, it rippled. It was a disruption. I saw the nurse wipe her eyes. I saw a shift in her posture. The despair that had been crushing her seemed to lift, just an inch, just enough to let her breathe. The golden spark I had unknowingly left behind was pulsing in her heart. 10 minutes later, the vision fast-forwarded. I saw her enter a patient's room. A monitor was beeping erratically. Because she had calmed down, because that tiny spark had given her a moment of clarity, she wasn't blinded by her own tears. She looked at the IV bag. She noticed a medication error, a dosage that was too high, just before she administered it. She stopped. She called the doctor. "She saved that man's life," Jesus said softly, standing beside me. "Because you stopped for 3 seconds. You thought your cup was empty, Elena, but even an empty cup can hold water for someone else. You did not feel the power go out of you, but I did." The scene dissolved and shifted again. We were now inside a small, cramped apartment. It was dark, lit only by the blue glow of a television screen. An elderly woman sat in a recliner, staring at the news. I recognized her, Mrs. Gabler, a widow from the parish. I had called her a few weeks ago, just a standard check-in call that the convent requires us to make. I remembered being bored during the call, half listening while I organized paperwork on my desk. "Look at the room," Jesus said. I looked. The room was filled with a thick, suffocating black smoke. It wasn't physical smoke. It was the manifestation of loneliness. It clung to the walls. It sat heavy on Mrs. Gabler's chest. It was slowly choking her. Then the phone rang in the vision. She picked it up. It was my voice on the other end. As I spoke, even though I remembered being bored and distracted, the sound of my voice acted like a fan. The black smoke began to swirl and dissipate, Every word I said, simply asking how her hip was, asking if she had enough groceries, pushed the darkness back. By the end of the call, the room was clear. Mrs. Gabler smiled. She turned off the angry news and opened her Bible. "You thought you were just doing paperwork," Jesus said. "You were exorcising the demon of loneliness. You have no idea of the power you carry." "But I didn't mean it," I protested. "I wasn't feeling holy. I was just doing my job." Jesus looked at me with a smile that was both amused and deadly serious. "Elena, holiness is not a feeling. It is a choice. A soldier does not need to feel brave to fight. He just needs to pick up his sword. You picked up the phone." "That is all I asked." He moved his hand and the apartment vanished. We were now suspended high at a modern office building, a skyscraper of glass and steel. We floated through the wall into a corner office on the top floor. A man in an expensive suit stood looking out the window. He was successful, wealthy, powerful. But when I looked at him with the spiritual sight Jesus gave me, he looked like a skeleton. He was starving. His soul was shriveled, papery and thin. He was surrounded by a cold, metallic light that offered no warmth. Then the vision shifted down 40 floors. In the basement, in a supply closet, a janitor was eating a sandwich. He was a man I had seen at early morning mass sometimes, sitting in the back row. He looked tired. His uniform was worn. But his soul was a blazing furnace. He was glowing with a radiant amber light that warmed the entire basement. He closed his eyes to pray before he ate. "Lord, bless the people in this building," the janitor whispered in the vision. "They seem so stressed. Give them peace." I watched as a beam of that amber light shot up from the basement, cutting through the concrete floors, up through the elevator shafts, all the way to the top floor. It wrapped around the starving man in the suit. The man paused, took a deep breath, and stepped away from the window, deciding not to make the ruthless phone call he had been planning. "Do you see?" Jesus asked. "The world judges by the height of the building. I judge by the heat of the fire. That janitor is holding this entire company together with his prayers, and no one knows his name, but I know his name." The vision changed again. This time it was chaotic. I saw a teenager sitting on a bed, staring at a phone. The air around the boy was filled with jagged red arrows, words, comments on social media. They were flying at him, piercing his aura, making him bleed spiritual light. He was drowning in them. "The noise," Jesus said, his voice filled with pain. "The new weapon." I watched as the boy typed a response, adding his own red arrow to the storm. Then I saw a teacher, a woman who wasn't particularly religious, stop by the boy's desk the next day in the vision. She didn't preach. She just put a sticker on his paper that said, "Great work," and smiled at him. That simple act of kindness acted like a shield. The red arrows bounced off him for the rest of the afternoon. "This is the battleground of your time," Jesus told me. "It is not in the Colosseums. It is in the screens. It is in the minds of the young. They are being hunted by despair." He swept his arm across the horizon, and the specific scenes vanished. Now, we were looking at a view of the entire city, perhaps the entire world. But it looked different. It was covered in a thick gray smog. It wasn't pollution, it was static. It looked like millions of chaotic, scratching lines scribbled over the streets, the houses, the schools. It was vibrating with a low, dissonant hum that made my teeth ache. "What is this?" I asked, feeling a tightness in my chest. "It looks horrible." "This is the noise," Jesus said. "This is the anxiety of your age. The constant distraction, the fear sold on screens, the demand for attention. My children are screaming on the inside, but they cannot hear my voice because the static is too loud. They think I am silent, but I am simply drowned out by their own machines." He gestured to the city below. "Look closer. Look for the openings." I squinted. Amidst the gray, scratching static, there were tiny, vertical beams of pure gold light shooting up from the ground, piercing the fog like lasers. They were scattered, some bright and thick, some faint and flickering. But wherever a beam existed, the gray static was pushed back, creating a circle of clarity and peace. "Those are the prayers," Jesus explained. "Not the loud ones shouted on street corners, not the ones spoken for vanity. Those are the quiet whispers of the broken. That is a mother praying for her son at 3 a.m. That is a man forgiving his father after 20 years. That is a child sharing her lunch." He pointed to a faint, flickering beam moving down a rainy street. It was moving fast. And that, he said, looking at me, that was you in the van. Lord, give me strength. That was your prayer. I stared at the light that represented me. It wasn't a roaring fire. It was a candle in a hurricane. It was wavering, threatening to go out, but it was there. And around it, for just a few feet, the gray static could not enter. You felt your prayers were bouncing off the ceiling, he told me, turning me to face him. But in this world of noise, silence is a weapon. Peace is an anchor. When you pray, even when you feel nothing, even when you feel like a fraud, you are cutting a hole in the gray fog so that my grace can pour through. If you stop, the hole closes and the fog wins. He then showed me something that took my breath away. He showed me the web of light. The view pulled back even further. I saw that the beams of light weren't isolated. Thin golden threads connected them. The janitor's light was connected to the man in the suit. My light was connected to the nurse, and her light was connected to the patient she saved. The patient was connected to his family. It was a vast, shimmering web of interdependence. No one is saved alone, Jesus said, and no one suffers alone. When you wake up in the morning and offer your day to me, you tension the web. You make it strong enough to catch someone else who is falling. You felt isolated, Elena. You felt like a single nun in a dying order. But look, he touched one of the threads. It vibrated, sending a pulse of light across the whole network. Your grandmother's prayers are still in this web, he said. The prayers of the sisters who came before you are still holding you up, and your prayers will hold up those who are not yet born. Time does not exist here. Love does not expire. I began to weep, the feeling of insignificance that had plagued me, the feeling that I was just a small, useless woman in a world that was moving on without God, shattered. I saw that the smallest act of kindness was like a nuclear reaction in the spiritual realm. But I didn't feel it, I cried, looking at him. Why didn't I feel you? Why did you let me walk in the desert for so long? Jesus looked at me with infinite gentleness. Because I needed you to learn to walk without crutches. Feelings are the candy of faith. They are sweet, but they do not nourish. Obedience, trust, that is the meat. You kept walking when you wanted to sit down. You kept praying when you thought no one was listening. That, Elena, is true love. Anyone can love me when the sun is shining. You loved me in the dark. That is what I cherish. He held up his hand and a new vision appeared. It was the future, or a possible future. I saw the world getting louder, more confused. I saw the gray static becoming thicker, more aggressive. I saw people walking around like zombies, their eyes glued to devices, their souls starving for connection. But I also saw pockets of resistance. I saw places of silence. I saw my own convent. I saw people coming to the doors, not just Catholics, but angry people, confused people, young people with tattoos and piercings, businessmen with empty eyes. They weren't coming for theology. They were coming because the convent was one of the few places left that was quiet. I am sending you back, Jesus said. My heart dropped. The physical sensation of dread was heavy. No, I pleaded, falling to my knees on the glass floor. The love radiating from him was so complete, the peace of this place so total, the thought of returning to the rain, the pain, the traffic, and the gray static was horrifying. Please, Lord, I'm done. I'm so tired. I can't go back to the noise. Don't make me go back. Jesus knelt down with me. He didn't rebuke me. He put a hand on my shoulder. Elena, look at the web. Look at the gaps. I looked. There were places where the web was tearing, where the lights were going out because people had given up. You were tired because you were carrying the weight of the world, which is not yours to carry, he said firmly. You thought you had to save them, someone. You thought you had to fix the problems of the city. That is my job. Your job is simply to be the wire that connects the earth to the sky. I do not need your success, Elena. I need your presence. I need you to go back and just be there. Be the silence in the room. But my body, I whispered. The crash. I felt it. I'm broken. He smiled, and the light around him intensified, becoming blindingly beautiful. I am the resurrection and the life. The body is just a suit of clothes. I can mend the fabric. He placed a hand on my forehead. The warmth was intense, like the sun at noon, searing but healing. Go back, he commanded. Tell them that the noise is a lie. Tell them that their small acts of love are the only things that are real. Tell them that I am not sitting on a distant throne waiting for them to die. I am standing right next to them in the grocery store, in the traffic, in the hospital waiting room. And tell them, I am not waiting for them to be perfect. I am waiting for them to be quiet enough to hear me. I can't, I whispered, the light overtaking my vision. I'm just one person. You are never just one person, he said. You are the vessel. That smile was the last thing I saw. The sensation of returning was violent. It wasn't a gentle drift. It felt like being sucked through a straw and slammed into a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. I gasped, a jagged, tearing breath that felt like fire in my lungs. My eyes flew open. I was blinded by harsh, fluorescent lights. There was a rhythmic beeping sound machines. Something was shoved down my throat, a tube. I gagged, my body convulsing, and immediately voices erupted around me. She's awake! Get the doctor! Restrain her arms! Don't let her pull the tube! I was in the ICU. The confusion was absolute. I tried to speak, but the tube choked me. I tried to move my legs, but they felt like they were encased in cement. It took them hours to stabilize me enough to remove the ventilator. I learned later that I had been in a coma for 3 days. It was Friday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, when I finally fully woke up. The doctors told me I shouldn't have survived. The impact had been catastrophic. The engine block of the van had been pushed into the driver's seat. My legs had been crushed between the steering column and the seat. My pelvis had been fractured. They had kept me sedated, debating when to operate, preparing my order for potential amputation of the right leg due to vascular damage. But when the orthopedic surgeon came in that afternoon, he didn't look like a man who had just saved a life. He looked pale. He looked shaken. He held up a digital tablet showing an X-ray taken an hour ago and compared it to one taken when I arrived on Tuesday. "Sister," he said, his voice shaking. He was a man of science, a man who dealt in facts and steel screws. "I don't know how to explain this. The bone fragmentation in your femurs, the images from Tuesday showed them shattered, like gravel. But these images, the ones from this morning," he tapped the screen, "the bone has knit together. The vascular damage is gone. It looks like an injury that healed 10 years ago, not 3 days ago. There is scarring on the bone, yes, but it is solid." I tried to sit up. I felt stiff. My muscles atrophied from 3 days of stillness, but the agonizing, screaming pain that should have been there, the pain of crushed bones, was a dull, distant ache. "I know," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper, my throat raw from the tube. "You know?" the doctor asked, staring at me over his glasses. "Sister, medically speaking, you should be dead. At the very least, you shouldn't be walking again for a year. I have colleagues flying in from Chicago just to look at these scans." I looked at him and then past him at the window where the rain was still falling against the glass. It was a gray day. The world outside looked identical to the one I had left. I could sense the noise, the anxiety, the rush of the city. I could feel the static pressing against the walls of the hospital. But inside the room, inside me, I felt a calm that was solid as stone. I saw the doctor's aura. He was stressed, overworked, worried about his son. I saw the nurse in the corner, worrying about her rent. "He sent me back," I said. The doctor frowned. "Who?" "Jesus," I answered. I didn't say it with religious fervor or dramatic flair. I didn't shout it. I said it like I was stating the weather. "He told me the world is too loud and he needs us to make quiet spaces." The doctor just stared at me. He checked my vitals again, shook his head, and left the room, muttering about anomalies. News of my recovery spread through the diocese like wildfire. They couldn't keep it quiet. I was walking within a week stiffly, yes, but walking on legs that had been crushed days before. I was discharged within 10 days. The skeptics said the initial X-rays must have been mixed up or the machine was faulty. They tried to rationalize the miracle away because miracles are frightening to a world that wants to control everything. But they couldn't explain the peace. Before the accident, I was a nervous, burnt-out woman. I was always rushing, always checking my watch, always worrying if I was doing enough. Now, people tell me that just sitting next to me makes them feel like they can breathe again. I returned to my work at the convent, but I work differently now. I don't rush. I don't worry about the numbers or the logistics of the food drive. When I hand a box of food to a homeless man, I don't just hand it over. I look him in the eye. I hold his hand for a moment. I remember the web of light, I remember that this small moment, this tiny connection, is an anchor holding back the chaos of the universe. I see the world differently now. When I walk down the street, I don't just see traffic. I see the gray fog of anxiety, but I also see the pillars of light. I see the tired mother on the bus, and I shoot a prayer to her, visualizing a beam of gold protecting her, and I see her shoulders relax. I don't need her to know it was me. It's better that she doesn't. I am sharing this because I know many of you feel the way I did. You feel like your prayers are hitting the ceiling. You look at your phone, at the wars and the politics and the anger, and you feel drowned by the gray fog. You feel like you are just one person, and a tired person at that. You think you need to do something huge, start a foundation, write a book, become a saint to matter to God. You don't. Jesus showed me the truth. He isn't looking for superstars. He isn't looking for people to build taller towers. He is looking for people who will stand in the middle of the noise and refuse to scream along with it. He is looking for the ones who will light a single candle and protect it with their hands. He showed me that the noise, the constant digital distraction, the outrage, the fear is the enemy of the soul. It is designed to keep us from the silence where God speaks. But he also showed me that the light is stronger. So please, don't wait until you feel holy to pray. Don't wait until the world makes sense to be kind. Don't wait for someday to deepen your faith. The noise will never stop on its own. You have to be the silence. You have to be the peace. When you forgive someone, you are healing the web. When you pray in the quiet of your room, you are holding up the sky. That is what he is waiting for. That is the only thing that is real. And I am here, walking on legs that were once crushed, to tell you that he is close, he is listening, and he loves you more than you can possibly imagine.